This is undoubtedly one of the toughest announcements that I've ever personally had to make. But after the accident and turn 4 at the end of the Daytona 500, we've lost Dale Earnhardt.
The crash that claimed the life of the intimidator, Dale Earnhardt Sr., on February 18, 2001, occurred during the final lap of the Daytona 500, one of NASCAR's most celebrated and high-stakes races. That day, he piloted his iconic black number 3 Chevrolet Monte Carlo. As the 200-lap event reached its climax, the competition on the track grew more intense. Drivers jockeyed for position at speeds nearing 190 miles per hour, creating a high-pressure environment fraught with potential for disaster. At the front of the pack, Michael Waltrip and Dale Earnhardt Jr., both teammates under Earnhardt's Dale Earnhardt Inc. banner, led the race. Earnhardt himself was running third, working to block and protect their positions while holding off a hard-charging group of competitors behind him. The pivotal moment unfolded in turn 3 of the final lap. Earnhardt's number 3 car was positioned in the middle of a tight 3-wide battle. To his left was Sterling Marlin in the number 40 Dodge, aggressively attempting to advance his position. To his right was Ken Schrader's number 36 Pontiac, maintaining a steady line. Traveling in such close quarters, the cars were separated by mere inches, their stability hanging by a thread. As the trio sped into turn 3, Marlin's car made slight contact with the left rear corner of Earnhardt's Chevrolet. Though the nudge seemed minor, it proved catastrophic. The rear of Earnhardt's car broke loose, initiating a fishtail that left him struggling to regain control. At such high speeds, even the smallest loss of stability can spiral into disaster, and Earnhardt's situation quickly worsened. As Earnhardt attempted to correct the slide, his car veered into Ken Schrader's Pontiac. The impact redirected Earnhardt's vehicle up the steep banking of turn 4 and into the outside retaining wall. The collision was devastating. His Chevrolet struck the concrete barrier at approximately 155 miles per hour, nearly head-on. The force of the crash was concentrated on the front right corner of the car, magnifying its lethality. Visually, the crash appeared less severe than many other high-profile accidents. Earnhardt's car remained largely intact, and there were no dramatic flips or disintegrations. However, the forces involved were immense, and the wall was made of solid concrete, incapable of absorbing energy. This lack of energy dissipation transferred the brunt of the crash directly into the car and Earnhardt's body. Ken Schrader's car, tangled with Earnhardt's during the collision, slid to a stop nearby. Schrader immediately exited his vehicle and rushed to check on Earnhardt. What he saw was haunting. Earnhardt sat motionless in his seat, his head slumped forward against the restraints. Schrader later described the scene as one that left no doubt about the severity of the situation. 2 critical factors exacerbated the tragedy. First, the lap belt in Earnhardt's harness system had been improperly installed, allowing it to fail during the crash. This failure caused his upper body to lurch forward violently, exposing his head and neck to fatal forces. Second, Earnhardt was not wearing a Hans head and neck support device, a relatively new safety innovation at the time. The absence of this protective device allowed his head and neck to whip forward unrestrained, leading to devastating injuries. As fellow competitor Tony Stewart proclaimed, Earnhardt's death sparked an entire new revolution in NASCAR driver safety. The Hans device became mandatory for all drivers. Energy-absorbing safer barriers were installed at tracks, and advancements in lap belt design and installation protocols were adopted to prevent such tragedies from occurring again. The emergency medical response. Emergency responders reached Earnhardt's car within seconds of the crash. At first glance, the scene appeared less severe than other dramatic wrecks that had occurred during the same race. Earnhardt remained strapped in his seat, his helmet still intact, and the car showed no significant structural collapse. However, medics quickly realized the gravity of the situation. Earnhardt was completely unresponsive. Efforts to extricate Earnhardt from his car were carried out with both urgency and precision. Once freed, medics began administering CPR in a desperate attempt to revive him. He was rushed by ambulance to Halifax Medical Center in Daytona Beach, where trauma specialists worked tirelessly to save him. Despite their efforts, Dale Earnhardt Sr. was pronounced dead at 5:16 p.m. Eastern Time. Adding a poignant layer to the tragedy, fellow driver Tony Stewart was already at Halifax Medical Center at the time. Stewart had been involved in an earlier crash during the same race, one that sent his car airborne in a dramatic multi-car pileup. Though Stewart's injuries were not life-threatening, he had been transported to the hospital for evaluation. Unaware of the unfolding events, Stewart was in a nearby treatment room as doctors fought unsuccessfully to save Earnhardt's life. The autopsy. Dr. Steve Bohannon of the Volusia County Medical Examiner's Office conducted Earnhardt's autopsy, revealing the extent of the injuries that led to his death. The primary cause of death was determined to be a basilar skull fracture, a catastrophic injury at the base of the skull. This type of fracture is particularly lethal because it often disrupts the brainstem and spinal cord, which control critical life functions such as breathing and heartbeat. The autopsy report provided further detail about the injuries Earnhardt sustained. 1. Skull and brain injuries. The basilar skull fracture extended into surrounding cranial structures, resulting in additional fractures at the base of the skull. Rapid deceleration caused a coup-contre-coup injury, where the brain struck the inside of the skull upon impact and then rebounded violently. The brainstem, responsible for regulating essential bodily functions, was severely damaged upon impact, likely resulting in instantaneous or near-instantaneous death. 2. Neck and spine damage. Although no major fractures were found in Earnhardt's cervical spine, the violent motion of his head during the crash placed immense strain on his neck. The basilar skull fracture was the fatal injury, exacerbated by the absence of a Hans device. 3. Chest and rib injuries. Earnhardt's improperly installed lap belt contributed to multiple rib fractures and a fractured sternum. These injuries were caused by the chest harness tightening violently during the crash. While serious, these injuries were not life-threatening. 4. Lung contusions and internal damage. Earnhardt's lungs showed evidence of contusions, likely caused by the intense forces exerted on his chest. These injuries, though painful and potentially dangerous, were secondary to the fatal head and skull trauma. The autopsy findings painted a grim picture of the immense physical forces involved in the crash. The injuries to Earnhardt's skull and brain were so severe that survival was impossible, even with immediate and advanced medical care.